This is how I like to classify basic sensory experience. When I have people learn mindfulness techniques, I have them note their experience based on these categories. This system was designed with two goals in mind. One is that it would tend to lead to insights in meditators because they can see how these different sensory systems interrelate. So that's sort of a pragmatic point of view, that it's convenient for people having aha experiences when they track their sensory events. The other goal was to create a system based on contrasts that would be convenient for study with what's called FMRI, that's functional magnetic resonance imaging. When you study the neural correlates of experience with fMRI, you can't actually image an experience. All that you can do is image two contrasting states. So I gave a lot of consideration as to what would be the most useful contrasts, both in terms of image studying that scientists might want to do, and in terms of what's likely to bring about insight experiences for the meditators who are being studied by those scientists. So with those two goals in mind, I created this system. I call it the basic states. The right-left gives you a contrast between a more objective side of experience versus a more subjective side of experience. For example, there are external physical sounds in the world, but there's also the internal sound of your self-talk. Sometimes when external sound expands, internal talk might go away, and you can, by watching that contrast, you can see some interesting interactions. So this would be in an auditory domain. I'll get to these guys in a minute. Analogously, there are external sights in the world, but there's also the internal visual experience of your mental images. When you're thinking of people, places, physical objects, when you have memory, plan, fantasy, or your eyes are closed and you think about where you are or how your body appears, you're having visual thoughts. So image is the more subjective side, and the external sights are the more objective side of visual experience. Then there's somatic experience, in other words, body experience. I believe that it's very important that people develop the ability to detect when their body has emotional type sensations. When a person experiences anger, fear, sadness, embarrassment, impatience, disgust, interest, joy, love, gratitude, humor, smile, and so forth, there are usually body sensations, distinctive body sensations associated with that. So the real juice of emotional experience, I would claim, is not so much in the internal talk and mental image, although that, of course, is important, but it's the emotional type sensations that give the strong valence or coloration or power to emotional experiences. So I think it's good that we have a word in English that means body sensation that seems emotional to a given individual at a given time. There is no such word that has that meaning in English. Neither is there any such word in any language that I'm familiar with. So I arbitrarily assign the word feel to mean affective somesthesia. That would be a very fancy way of saying emotional body sensations. Affective is a Latin phrase meaning emotional. Somesthesia is body sensation, body experience. So I use feel for that. And that would represent a somewhat subjective side of the body relative to touch, which is everything else, all the other ordinary experiences in the body, itches and aches, pressures and pains, sleepy sensations, ordinary breathing, ordinary pulse, that kind of thing, is more of an it. If you have pain, take that as a touch. If the pain causes anger, fear, sadness, those reactions, those body sensations, I would call feel. And in point of fact, feel, image, talk represent a reactive system. They can react to touch, sight, sound. They're also a proactive system. They can go off on their own and spin, memory, plan, fantasy, and so forth. You have a fundamental contrast between auditory, visual, and somatic. And then across here you have a somewhat more objective side and a somewhat more subjective side. Now, a third level of contrast is between the ordinary sensory activity, touch, sight, sound, feel, image, talk, and corresponding restful states. For example, when you're focusing on external sound, it might happen that there's not any sound. That's an interesting experience. That's a restful state, and you can note that as silence. What's even more interesting is if you happen to be focusing on internal talk and it goes away, well, I have a term for that experience. I call that quiet. So you have some restful states here. If you don't have any images, you can be aware of mental blank. Or even if you have images, there's a way that I teach people to focus on a background of blank. You can defocus your external sight. Your eyes are still open, but you're just sort of letting light in. And that's a restful state corresponding to external sight that's used by many different people. Samurai, for example, used to intentionally soft focus their eyes in practicing martial arts. So that's another restful state. The contrast with sight, I call that light. And then contrasting with touch is the physical relaxation of the body. And contrasting with feel is its absence, which I call emotional peace. So this gives us a contrast between somatic, visual, auditory, a contrast between subjective, reactive, proactive versus objective experience, and then a contrast between ordinary experience and corresponding pleasant, restful states. So these are the basic states, and I build different mindfulness systems based on these states.